Hi, everyone. My name is Ted Glutz. I'm the Director of Sales for Innovative Computing Systems. It's my honor to introduce our CEO and founder, Michael Kemps. Thank you very much for joining us today for our presentation on cybersecurity and client audits. Take it away, Michael.
Thank you, Ted, and good morning, everyone. Just confirming audio is okay?
Loud and clear.
Perfect, thank you. Cybersecurity and client audits. These are two very, very hot topics amongst not only our client base, but the legal profession. And I was asked a number of months ago to put this presentation together for one of the ALA chapters in Northern California, and subsequently have done it numerous times throughout various ALA chapters and have added to it. And we have a phenomenal handout that will be distributed to those that are in the webinar that sort of lists and goes through a lot of the questions and challenges that we've had to tackle amongst numerous audits that have come from varying clients of law firms. Quick agenda. The who are we is not so much a pitch, because I think most of the people that are in this webinar are either clients or know us, so don't take it that way. The background is really to talk about the challenges that we face and why we're here. We'll go through some common vulnerabilities. I'll tell you a story about one particular firm that we had to go through and resolve some large challenges. We'll go through some key areas to address and things that you can hit even before you're hit with an audit or before you do vulnerability scanning or anything else. We've got some key takeaways and article links, and then the document that we'll share. This is a little bit of a short one. Happy to unmute for questions at the end and have conversation in most of these. I started them by having the benefit of looking everybody in the face and sort of chatting about their environments, and some of that's gone into this. So who are we? Long and short of it is 30 years working almost exclusively in the legal environment, in and around technology, whether it's internal or cloud-based or colo-based or whatever else. And we've had the benefit of going through that entire time span and doing projects and providing managed services and doing everything around it. So it gives us a touch and a look and a feel over and beyond one environment, which I think is very helpful. Some key points here are that, I think if you go back more than 2 years, it was pretty common for law firms to just muddle along, do their thing, upgrade their environments, keep it running, make sure they had a good firewall and antivirus, and move on. That is just not enough today. Even if you don't today have what I'll call the top 2 client areas that are pushing for audits, and for me that's financial services and healthcare. This is where we're seeing the most client audits coming. Even if you're not in those 2 areas, it's very likely that either in taking on a new client, a partner will ask you for involvement in either pitching the client or chatting with the client about information security, matter protection, ethical walls, on and on and on. So it's good to be prepared. It's good to be able to speak to these issues, not to the point necessarily of turning yourselves into CISOs, into information security officers, but just to make sure that the environments are hardened, controlled, patched, scanned, not getting hit with malware, all those things. So that's that. For a lot of the scanning and vulnerability testing that we do, we use a third party. They're referenced on the bottom left to give them credit, Digital Defense, and a lot of what comes out of their audits gets hit. And I liked this graph that sort of talks about information security concerns overall. More and more it's we're hearing a lot in the industry about, hacks and malware and phishing and all the above, but I'm not sure that employee negligence, which is the third one, is talked about enough, and that there's education that is pushed throughout the firm, not just from a policy perspective or from an employee manual perspective, but actually getting in touch with your end users from with a desire to be helpful and to protect yourselves, because no matter how hardened the environments are, no matter how good they are, if we have not to hit on the receptionists specifically, but it seems over and over again that we find that it's the with all due respect, lower level administrative and or receptionist that opens an attachment, gets malware, helps it spread, et cetera, et cetera. So, which isn't to say that it only wouldn't be that position that would get it, but we tend to see that over and over again. Yeah, so that's that. Sort of repeated the same thing. A survey that says, look, in your opinion, what's the greatest information security threat? Notice it's not hackers. It is the careless employee that goes in and opens an email, an attachment, a PDF that looks like it's genuine, all those things without being appropriately cautious. So let's talk about some of the things that we see over and over again in these audits. I'm not one for reading bullet points, but I am going to go through them so that we talk about it. Poor BYOD. It's quite common today for firms to allow people to bring their own devices in, whether they're iPhones or Androids, iOS devices or Androids, whatever they are, and to accommodate the rapid expansion of the consumer market to be able to be supported inside of a law firm. I'm not against it, but we need to manage those devices. And unfortunately, I think there's too many firms that don't manage them, allow them to connect to their email environments, and then when there's a separation, they're forced to delete all the data on the device rather than being able to separately control email that's on the device and or take the risk of letting the device go with confidential information on it. Prescriptive password policies on common use equipment. So I'm not talking about the sort of regular everyday password policy where we say, yeah, look, we're going to change our passwords every 90 days and they're going to have minimum requirements. I'm talking about not realizing or remembering that there are devices in the environment, maybe they're older, in particular Hewlett-Packard LaserJet printers that are older, where the JetDirect devices that ship with those printers have security risks and have no passwords on those devices. And quite commonly, when we run these scans, we'll find this to be the #1 issue that's on the list, because we will have already dealt with things like password policies and controlling Active Directory users that shouldn't be in the environment and that sort of thing, because we think about it in advance. And then you go run this, and you all of a sudden see, oh, guess what? There's 50 printers in your environment that have wide open JetDirect with no passwords. So it's sort of the common use stuff that we don't think about. Infrequent and inadequate training. I can't say it enough. Do brown bag sessions. Bring people in for lunches. Talk about what's going on in the industry, outside of the industry, not just what's been in the media and Equifax and everything else, but talk about what's going on in law firms and that clients are paying attention and are actually making law firm hiring decisions based on technology and information security. Inconsistent patch management. Do you do it quarterly? Do you do it monthly? Do you patch everything? Do you selectively patch Windows? What about things like SQL and Exchange and third-party applications? And one common one that we always struggle with is, do we update Microsoft Office and do we fully patch it or not? Because doing so can affect things like document management systems and macros and integration and all that. So thinking about that and testing it. No comprehensive IT plan. How often have you heard partners say, Can't we make those workstations last another year? Do we really have to talk about budget this year? Yes, you do. Things are moving from CapEx to OpEx. Things are moving to recurring revenue type plans in the industry. Going to the cloud requires subscriptions and support. It really requires an overarching look at the environment, even if you have zero demand to do any cloud computing of any kind, which is far from true, because everyone starts talking about, now we're not going to go to the cloud. Oh, but we're using Mimecast and we're using Office 365. Well, guess what? You're in the cloud. Weak or no encryption. It's quite common to find SSL encryption enabled for email servers, email accounts, that sort of thing. That's pretty common these days. But what about file shares on servers? In particular, on older operating systems that may or may not support it, and older hardware that may or may not support it. Having live unsupported versions of operating systems in environments where you're just hanging on because, damn it, that accounting application is going to have to be upgraded, but we don't want to have to deal with that, so we're going to hang on to that old server. There are security risks associated with that. Open FTP ports, not so common anymore, but still exists. That also brings a mention of using things like Dropbox and other unsecure platforms and that wasn't specifically to trash Dropbox or even endorse or not endorse it. Just be careful with where you're exposing data and how you're sharing it. Exposed web servers with insufficient security, document management systems that provide clients with access to specific matters and accounts that maybe exist and haven't been managed and haven't been disabled. Firewalls with expired subscriptions, this one's classic. So everyone gets all excited. They put in the latest, greatest, next-gen firewall, pick a vendor. They buy the content filtering subscription, and they've got intrusion protection enabled. They spend all this money, time, and effort, and it's perfect. Then they forget about it. Subscription expires, doesn't get renewed, all the functionality gets disabled, and all that work just goes to pot until the subscription gets renewed. So pay attention, manage the calendars. Two-factor authentication. I used to put this at the top because there were so many firms that just didn't do it. And now you tend to see it more and more with remote access solutions only. Oh, we don't need that inside our network. Yes, you do. Oh, we don't need that on our web pages. Oh, yeah, you do. We don't need that, I don't know, in our litigation support platform. Yes, you do. So sort of looking at the entire environment for two or multi-factor authentication is critical. Another one that comes up again and again is gee, I've put two-factor authentication into my environment. Can I simplify my password policies now? Because I require another factor of authentication, and my personal advice on that is no. So let's talk about an experience that that a firm had. This is a smaller mid-sized firm, sort of an outlier in Southern California that really hadn't addressed security at all. They had older hardware. They had a sort of temporary IT person that would come in part-time from time to time to quote unquote help them. And they would reach out to us only when, they were desperate or they needed help or whatever. Really hadn't paid attention on updating and upgrading anything. And sure enough, the receptionist opens a phishing email. And server shares got encrypted. Workstation images and workstation data got encrypted. To make matters worse, the internet connection was very slow. And so this actually happened about a year ago now, and it happened on December 20th. And we spent December 20th through December 24th restoring, recovering, and bringing this firm back up, including having to take certain items off site because the connections were so slow and the patches were so outdated that we had to scramble and do a lot of them manually on faster connections elsewhere. This is obviously an absolute worst case situation, but it is a real live firm that this happened to, they lost 4 days of billing. They spent over $30,000 recovering the environment with us. Geez, thanks for the revenue and the services, but I would have loved to have spent that money on other things that would have actually helped them. So pay attention, keep the environments current, pay attention to patching. Don't let it slide just because the end user demand and the help desk requirements are high. Spend time on it. So, key areas to address before it all happens. Two-factor authentication. This is number one. Protect all assets. Watch for things like service accounts, etc. Don't allow access in for anything that is not two-factor protected. Encryption, not just in transit, but at rest. If you have servers and server versions that won't allow you to encrypt your data, upgrade or put it in your budget, put it in your plan. DLP, multiple ways to address this subject. One is a lot of these audits require that access to local USB ports, the ability to export data, all those things be disabled, and that you validate and prove that they are disabled. We've had to provide screenshots and validation and all the above. How you handle removable media. Do you give a workstation to a key partner or to a key player in the firm and only allow that to happen at that workstation? Another topic in the DLP area is emails that are going out of the firm that have client protected data, social security numbers, credit cards, driver's license numbers, all of those things. There are solutions. I try in these webinars not to mention vendor names. That there are solutions that will quarantine emails, for example, that contain that data, and prompt a designated administrator to ensure that emails that contain that information are quarantined before they go out of the firm, and they're either stopped or they're approved or handled in some way. Vulnerability scans. It's not enough anymore to just assume that properly configuring a firewall by a genius and locking down ports and enabling the right software applications is enough, because you're not going to find things like the JetDirect printers with no passwords, all of those things. Backup and disaster recovery. This is a topic in and of itself. But I think the key here is to test it, to have runbooks, to validate that the data that's being replicated offsite into some cloud provider's environment exists, is valid, can be accessed, can be restored. And it gets expensive testing that and doing things like failovers and validation testing and all the above. But I think you have to sort of decide what works for you and what makes sense for you to be comfortable to ensure that A, your data is good and intact, and B, that you're getting the value that you're paying for and having that replication happen. Security awareness training. Actually spending on-site time dedicated with individuals. Again, I like brown bag lunches. I like opportunities to feed people and educate them. And I recognize and realize that putting mandates on training gets sticky. It's almost like HR training. It's like, oh, do I have to? Yeah, you have to. Stuff's important. And even if you're not in the medical, if you don't have clients in the medical field, having sort of baseline understanding about HIPAA and other compliance requirements, what a business associate agreement is and what's required for that, just a baseline level of knowledge is very good and very helpful. Some key takeaways. It's a good article, and we'll share the slides, and we have another attachment to share that I'll show you in a minute as well. But sort of some conversation about why it's not just IT that's required in law firm cybersecurity anymore, and that administrators, executive directors, partners, all of the key stakeholders in the law firm need to pay attention to this topic, and the partners really own it, and I think they're figuring that out because clients are starting to make it an issue. whether in onboarding the law firm and validating that the firm has sufficient security in place before they're hired, whether going back in and executing on client audits. And then the other second article that's a great link, this was actually forwarded to me this morning and I threw it in here, is that as clients demand audits, there's not really any standards. And who's responsible for setting the terms of the audit and how much the firm has to do or not do in order to comply. We've had audits that are 2 pages long, and we've had audits that are 15 to 20 tabs in a spreadsheet that take months to comply with. And the reality is that firms look at that and they say, well, gee, what percentage of our business, is coming from the firms that are requiring this? Okay, I am, before we hit questions, let me bring up a document that I intend to share with you all. Apologies because I'm losing my voice a little bit. We'll share this with you, and I'm not going to read it, but we have compiled sample questions from other client audits and split it into areas of email instant messaging, backup DR, standard builds, app controls, etc. So I'm not going to read the document to you. We'll share it. There's all sorts of good stuff in here that you can use to review and warn yourself in advance before you get hit with the audit request. So with that, let's flip to questions. Ted or William, if you could unmute everyone, that'd be nice.
I believe it's done. Does anyone have any questions, or would you like to leave a question in the chat window? That'd be fine as well.
Ted, I'm not seeing that they're unmuted, nor do I see any chat window questions. So maybe the best approach here is we'll share our standard document and happily address any and all questions.
There's a chat.
How to sell this to management? I sort of mean this in a humorous way. Scare the daylights out of them. I think share the audit questions. Share the experience that other firms have had and what the audit questions are. Identify the things that are in the audit questions that you've already addressed. Identify the things that you can address without significant cost. And then alternatively, prioritize things to put into future IT budgets. For example, two-factor authentication that can further secure your environment. Anybody else? You bet, Bert, no problem.
Michael, we have unmuted everyone. Apparently everyone has muted themselves. I don't believe there have been any other unanswered questions or questions out there. Everyone know that we will, as soon as the recording is completed, we'll make sure to get that out to everyone. If you have follow-up questions that for one reason or another you weren't able to ask here, please feel free to follow up with myself or William Pate, who will be sending the recording out to everyone.
And in addition, we'll share the best practices audit document we've got as well. Thank you everyone for attending and for putting up with my voice loss at the end.